The diner's neon sign flickered against the night, casting a jittery pink glow over the cracked sidewalk. Inside, the warm smell of grease, coffee, and fried eggs filled the cramped space, but outside the wind cut through thin jackets like a knife. A girl, no older than 13, lingered by the door, her coat too thin, shoes worn to the soles, hair falling in loose strands across her face. Beside her, a scruffy German shepherd sat perfectly still. Its coat was patchy, eyes alert and intelligent, tail twitching occasionally. It wasn't just a stray, it had purpose, though no one inside the diner could see it. Rick Dalton, the diner manager, noticed her immediately. His first thought was irritation. He prided himself on order, on rules. Rules were simple. No pets, no loiterers. He'd made that sign himself, a laminated sheet tacked beside the door. And yet here she was, muddy footprints streaking across the linoleum floor. "Excuse me, miss," Rick called out, adjusting his apron. His voice was tight, impatient. "This is a business. No pets allowed, and you can't just stand there." The girl's eyes flicked up, wide and fearful but resolute. I just need some water," she whispered. Her voice was soft but steady, carrying a strange confidence, as if she had rehearsed this 100 times. The dog sat perfectly still, ears tilted, watching Rick, but not barking, not lunging, not begging, simply observing. Rick sighed, running a hand down his face. The diner had been crowded earlier, and the cleanup was already taking longer than expected. He didn't have time for this, for the drama that always seemed to surround the homeless and the stray animals. "I said no. Now leave before I call the cops." His tone sharpened, edged with annoyance. The girl's lips trembled, but she didn't argue. She simply nodded, glancing down at the dog. The dog tilted its head, eyes softening, almost mournful, and she spoke a single word, barely audible: "Wait." But Rick had already turned away, busying himself with wiping down the counter, ignoring the protest rising inside him. Minutes stretched. The girl didn't move immediately. She looked around the diner, the worn vinyl booths, the chrome edges dulled from decades of use, the faded posters advertising milkshakes and pie specials. Her gaze lingered on families and couples chatting, on the small heater casting a weak warmth across the linoleum. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering, but her dog stayed calm, seemingly sensing the tension. Rick returned from the back room, wiping his hands on a towel. "I'm serious. Out now," he barked. The girl stepped forward slightly, eyes pleading. "Please, I just need a few minutes. It's freezing out there." Rick clenched his jaw. He prided himself on discipline, and allowing this girl inside would ruin that. He glanced at the dog again, scruffy, thin, and clearly untrained. "It's not just cold," he said. "It's a business rule, no pets, and I don't have time to babysit." The girl's shoulders slumped. For a fleeting second, her eyes flashed with something fierce, something unyielding. But she didn't argue. She lowered her gaze, then whispered something only the dog could hear. The dog, obedient to that single command, shifted slightly, sitting back on its haunches. Its eyes stayed locked on Rick, measuring him, judging him. Rick motioned toward the door with a jerk of his hand. "Fine, go, both of you." Outside, the cold hit immediately. Wind whipped around their faces, biting through the thin fabric of her coat. She clutched the dog's collar, its coarse fur scratching her palms, and together they stepped off the cracked sidewalk and into the darkness. The street was almost empty, except for a lone car idling at the corner, its headlights cutting through the fog. The girl paused and turned back toward the diner, just long enough to see Rick behind the counter, finally resuming his cleaning. She could see the faint twitch of his eyes as he looked toward her one more time. She felt a flicker of something, anger, guilt, but didn't wait to find out. She whispered another word, a soft command, and the dog moved closer to her side, stepping carefully over the uneven pavement. Rick exhaled, straightening his shoulders. Relief surged through him. No more trouble, no more rules broken, business as usual. He wiped his hands and muttered under his breath, "Idiots, just idiots." He didn't notice the shadows shifting near the streetlight. He didn't notice the slight movement of something, or someone, watching them from across the street. And he certainly didn't notice the faint clicking of a metal object on the sidewalk, nor the subtle flick of eyes glinting from the darkness. The girl and her dog walked a few paces before she stopped again. She glanced down at the dog, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Stay close," she whispered. The dog pressed its body against hers, tail still low, ears flat, ready. A faint rumble from the diner door reached them, lights flickering, perhaps a draft, perhaps something else. The girl's heart skipped a beat. She gripped the dog's collar tighter. There was danger out there, she knew, not just the cold, not just the world's cruelty. Something was coming. She didn't know what, but her instincts screamed it. Meanwhile, back inside, Rick leaned over the counter, counting the cash drawer absent-mindedly. Plates clattered in the kitchen behind him, but he didn't hear the creak of the front door. Didn't hear the faint, hurried steps approaching the diner from the darkened street. He didn't notice the chill settling in, the tension hanging in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. The girl, still clutching the dog, pulled her coat tighter around herself. She glanced once more at the warm glow spilling from the diner's windows. For a moment her lips trembled and she wanted to turn back to beg. She wanted the comfort of warmth, even if it meant arguing, even if it meant humiliation. But something inside her stayed still steady. She couldn't go back. Not yet. The dog growled low, almost imperceptibly. She stiffened, scanning the empty street. Something had shifted, movement at the edge of the neon-lit sidewalk. Shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally. Her pulse quickened, but she stayed calm. She had learned that panic could be deadly. The dog was tense, muscles coiled, ears tilted toward the sound. Rick, oblivious, leaned back on the counter. "Good riddance," he muttered under his breath. Then the diner lights flickered violently, plunging the interior into half-shadow. A chill ran down Rick's spine. The warmth that had seemed so secure moments ago now felt fragile, vulnerable. The front door slammed open with a force that made everyone inside jump. Glass rattled in its frame. Rick's heart raced. Customers ducked instinctively. A figure, or was it three, stood silhouetted against the harsh glow of the streetlights. The girl's eyes widened. She didn't run. She didn't scream. Her hand tightened on the dog's collar, and the dog's growl turned deeper, sharper, alerting her to a danger she couldn't yet name. Inside, Rick's breath hitched. The door swung back and forth violently, almost as if the diner itself were gasping. He realized in a flash of panic that his decision, to kick them out, might have consequences he couldn't have imagined. Outside, the girl whispered again, softly, barely audible. The dog's body tensed. The shadows moved closer. And then came the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps, deliberate, menacing. Rick's chest tightened. Something was wrong. He hadn't felt fear like this in years. And somewhere deep in his gut, he knew that the warmth of his diner, the rules he clung to, were about to be shattered. The girl and the dog stared at the approaching figures. Neither flinched, neither moved. Because they knew they were ready. And then the first mask appeared in the doorway. The diner fell silent. And Rick realized too late that the night had only just begun. The moment the masked figure stepped inside, the diner transformed. The warm hum of conversation and clinking dishes vanished into a jagged silence. Rick froze, his hands mid-wipe on a plate, eyes locked on the intruder. Behind the mask, dark eyes glinted, calculating and cold. The figure's companions followed close behind, each carrying weapons that gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Everyone down," the leader barked, a voice rough, unyielding. Panic ricocheted through the small diner like a live wire. Customers screamed, ducking under tables, clutching their purses, phones, and each other. Coffee cups shattered, coffee spilling across the floor in steaming, pungent rivers. Rick's stomach turned. He'd faced unruly customers before, fights and arguments, but never anything like this. The fear in the room was palpable, suffocating. Rick dropped behind the counter as one of the men vaulted over, shoving him to the floor. He hit the linoleum hard, the impact sending a jolt up his spine. Pain mingled with fear. Cash drawers rattled. Plates clattered. The smell of burnt coffee and fear filled the air. "Register now," the leader barked, waving his gun with menacing authority. Rick's hands shook as he fumbled with the cash drawer. Coins spilled over the counter like a small waterfall of metal. Bills slipped through his fingers. The robbers' shouts cut through the chaos. One shouted at a frightened customer, gesturing wildly with his weapon. Another moved toward the back, herding the trapped diners. Outside, across the cracked sidewalk, the girl crouched behind a dumpster. Her coat was now dusted with frost, the night air piercing through her thin jacket. She wrapped her arms around her dog. The dog, muscles coiled, head low, watched the diners through the grimy windows. Its ears twitched, tracking every movement, every sound. Its eyes glinted with intelligence. This wasn't just instinct. This was precision. Rick's gaze darted toward the windows and door. For the first time, he felt a prickle of unease. He squinted through the glass, but all he could see was the darkness beyond, the flickering neon sign and movement. Something moved near the dumpster. "Who's there?" he shouted, panic rising. His voice cracked, betraying his fear. The girl's eyes stayed on him, calm, unblinking, even as she whispered a single word to the dog. Instantly, the dog shifted, tensing its body, muscles rippling beneath matted fur. The scrappy animal moved with deliberate precision, circling closer to the front entrance. It was no longer just a stray, it was a guardian. Inside, the leader's patience frayed. "I said move, now," he yelled, firing a warning shot into the ceiling. The sharp crack of gunfire made everyone duck instinctively. Sparks rained from the ceiling tiles as dust fell like snow around the terrified diners. A little boy whimpered, burying his face in his mother's arm. Rick's hands were frozen over the drawer. The realization hit him like a punch. He had kicked out the only person capable of stopping this. The girl and the dog, outside, in the freezing dark, and he had been too blind to notice. "Get him!" one of the robbers screamed at the counter. Rick scrambled backward, narrowly avoiding a kick that would have sent him sprawling. Plates and utensils clanged to the floor, bouncing and spinning, adding a chaotic soundtrack to the fear-stricken scene. Outside, the dog's low growl rolled through the icy air. It was a sound that vibrated with warning, authority, and unflinching courage. The girl whispered again, so softly that no human inside the diner could hear, but the dog understood immediately. The intruder closest to the front door, a burly man with a ski mask stretched tight across his face, stepped toward the shadow near the dumpster. The dog lunged. Not wildly, not without control, precise, calculating, and fast. The man stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the curb, his gun clattering to the ground. Inside, the remaining robbers froze. The sudden noise, the commotion outside, threw their coordination into chaos. "What the hell?" one shouted. "Someone's out there." Rick crawled toward the window, heart hammering. The sight that met him made him gasp. The dog, this supposedly homeless stray, had one robber pinned in the snow, teeth inches from the man's throat, growling with a controlled ferocity that spoke volumes. The girl's hand rested on the dog's head, calm and commanding. Rick's pulse raced. Every instinct screamed that he should call the police, that he should run, that he should hide, but he couldn't. Not yet. His guilt tethered him in place, weighing heavy on his chest. He had judged them. He had turned them away. And now, if the girl and the dog failed, people inside might die. The dog released the robber as quickly as it had pinned him, but the fear it instilled was irreversible. The man scrambled to his feet, looking wildly around, unsure what had just happened. The girl's eyes met Rick through the glass. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The message was clear: you did this, and now we're going to fix it. Inside, the leader's patience snapped. "Back to your positions," he barked. The remaining robbers herded the hostages tighter, voices cracking with tension. Shots rang out, fired into the ceiling, walls, anything but people, but the terror was enough to paralyze. The girl whispered again, a single command, and the dog darted back into cover, moving along the edge of the diner, ears flat, eyes sharp. Rick's stomach churned. He couldn't tear his eyes away. Something miraculous and terrifying was unfolding before him. Then the unexpected happened. The leader noticed movement near the window. His gun swung toward it, hands shaking. "Get out of here," he barked into the street. But the girl didn't move. She stayed crouched, commanding the dog with subtle gestures. The dog, perfectly synchronized with her movements, flanked the front entrance, cutting off the man's retreat. Outside, the wind howled, snow and frost stinging the girl's cheeks. Yet she remained steadfast, her breath visible in small, steady clouds, eyes locked on the intruder. Inside, the robbers were rattled. Their careful plan, rehearsed and precise, was collapsing. They had underestimated their opposition. They had assumed weakness, and they had been wrong. Rick felt the weight of every mistake pressing down on him. He had judged too quickly. He had dismissed courage and loyalty in a thin coat and matted fur. He had allowed the girl to leave, thinking she was powerless. Now he realized that she was the only hope anyone had. The dog lunged again, forcing the intruder back. Shouts rang out. The girl stepped forward, voice strong, commanding, but calm, measured. "Go now." The man stumbled, confusion and fear overtaking him. Inside, the remaining robbers hesitated, unsure if they should flee or hold their ground. That pause, that fraction of a second, changed everything. Rick's jaw tightened. He stood, trembling, realizing with cold clarity. The girl and the dog were no ordinary outcasts. They were precise, fearless, and in this moment the only chance of survival for everyone trapped inside. And then the sound that made Rick's blood run cold, the second shot. It rang out from outside, and the diner fell into a deadly silence. Rick froze. Every head inside was lifted, heartbeats loud, synchronized with the chaos. The girl and the dog were gone from the window view. Only shadows moved, shifting, ready. The intruders exchanged panicked glances. Where did they go?" the leader demanded. Rick swallowed hard. He couldn't answer. He didn't need to. He only needed to watch and pray that the girl and her dog would emerge victorious. A sudden crash from the rear entrance broke the tension, and the remaining robber spun, gun raised. The dog appeared again, darting from cover, agile and fast, ready to strike. Rick's chest tightened. The realization hit him like ice. He had thrown them out, and now they were the only ones capable of saving the lives he had sworn to protect inside his diner. The girl's voice, low and commanding, reached through the chaos, just a whisper, but Rick felt it as a jolt. "Stay calm." And for the first time that night, Rick Dalton understood. He had underestimated them. He had misjudged them, and he had no choice but to rely on them now. The dog's growl deepened, the girl's eyes glimmered, and outside the night held its breath. Because the real battle was just beginning. The cold night air pressed against the girl's thin coat like icy fingers, but she barely noticed. Her focus was razor-sharp, every fiber of her being tuned to the danger in front of her. The dog crouched low, ears flat, muscles coiled like springs, eyes tracking every movement inside the diner through the large front window. Each shadow, each twitch, each clatter of dishes told a story only they could read. The robber closest to the street had stumbled back when the dog first lunged, gun clattering to the ground. He scrambled, scrambling for control, but the dog's growl followed him like a living warning. The girl's voice, calm but firm, cut through the night. "Stay, watch," one word. That was all it took. Coda obeyed without hesitation, muscles rippling as he held the intruder in place, not harming, just warning. Rick Dalton, pressed against the counter inside the diner, watched in disbelief. His heart pounded as he realized what he had dismissed as a scruffy stray was, in fact, something extraordinary. He swallowed hard, shame knotting his stomach. He had thrown them out. And now, outside in the freezing dark, they were the only hope anyone inside had. Inside, the leader barked at the remaining robbers. "We move, now!" Panic began to fray their nerves. One customer had begun whimpering, tears streaking her face. Another, an elderly man, pressed his hands over his ears, eyes wide with terror. Plates rattled in the kitchen, silverware clanging to the floor. The once confident criminals now trembled, unsure of how to proceed. The girl whispered again, her breath visible in small, steady clouds. The dog responded instantly, sliding to her side and crouching low, tail barely moving. They were synchronized, a single unit of controlled focus. One intruder attempted to step outside, maybe thinking to chase the dog or confront the girl. But the dog was faster. In a blur of motion, Coda darted forward, shoulder brushing against the man's knees. The robber stumbled, legs tangling, gun bouncing across the asphalt. He yelped, his balance lost, and nearly fell completely to the ground. The girl didn't move from her hiding spot. She just whispered another single word. Instantly, Coda adjusted, positioning himself strategically between the man and the diner. Rick's breath caught. He had never seen anything like it. The dog was not attacking recklessly. Every movement was calculated, precise, protective, trained, efficient, and yet controlled. The so-called stray was now the greatest weapon Rick had ever witnessed. The leader's frustration boiled over. He had assumed weakness. He had assumed fear. He had assumed the girl and her dog were powerless. He was wrong, dead wrong. Inside, he barked orders, but the remaining robbers hesitated. Their confidence was cracking, their carefully orchestrated plan unraveling in seconds. Shots rang out, blind, desperate, and frantic. But the girl's attention to detail, her calm commands, and the dog's precise interventions kept them at bay. Coda's growl rolled through the air like a living warning, every inch of his body a barricade of muscle and loyalty. One of the robbers near the back shouted, panicking, "Someone's outside. Who the hell is out there?" Rick didn't answer. He couldn't. He only watched, heart thundering in his chest, as the girl and Coda worked together seamlessly. Every command she whispered, every subtle hand motion, resulted in immediate, flawless execution from the dog. The chaos inside the diner contrasted sharply with the precision outside, a yin and yang of fear and control. Then a noise, metal scraping against concrete, caught the girl's attention. She glanced toward the side alley. Another robber had tried to escape. She whispered a single word, barely audible, "Stop." Coda's ears twitched, muscles coiled. In a blink, he intercepted the man, blocking his path with a sudden, decisive movement. The robber froze, eyes wide with fear, as the dog growled low and threatening, teeth glinting in the dim streetlight. Rick's jaw went slack. He realized with a chill crawling down his spine that he had misjudged them entirely. The girl and her dog were not victims. They were not helpless. They were the saviors of everyone trapped inside. Inside, the leader shouted in frustration, scanning the room. "Move, grab someone, now." But his confidence was gone. His plan had disintegrated in seconds, replaced by panic, uncertainty, and fear. The girl remained calm, whispering again, and Coda adjusted his stance, eyes never leaving the fleeing figure. She gave a subtle hand signal, and the dog lunged, not recklessly but with precision, tripping the man before he could reach safety. The gun slid out of his hands, clattering across the sidewalk. He scrambled backward, fear etched on his face. Rick realized with horror that they were witnessing a near-miraculous event. A girl, barely older than a child, and a supposedly homeless, scruffy dog had turned the tables on armed robbers. They were no longer predators and victims. They were strategists, defenders, a unit that refused to fail. Inside, the robbers panicked further. One fired blindly toward the window, shattering glass, but Coda was already moving. He dodged, shifted, and blocked the next man who tried to flee. The girl whispered, a low, commanding tone, and the dog adjusted again, perfectly synchronized with her movements. Rick's mind raced. He couldn't comprehend how a stray dog and a homeless girl could exert such control, such precision, against armed men. Every instinct told him to intervene, but every rational thought reminded him that this girl was the only hope for survival. The wind whipped harder. Frost stung her cheeks, yet the girl remained steady, voice low, eyes sharp. Coda's growl deepened. Another robber tried to rush past them. The dog intercepted, forcing him backward with a calculated shove of his shoulder. He stumbled, disarmed, and froze. The girl's eyes met Rick through the shattered window. There was no fear, no panic, only clarity, only control, only the quiet, unnerving confidence of someone who had already calculated every outcome and who was unwilling to let anyone inside the diner be harmed. Rick's chest tightened. Guilt clawed at him. He had judged too quickly, dismissed courage and loyalty in a thin coat and matted fur. He had allowed them to be thrown into the cold, and now they were the only ones capable of stopping the unfolding nightmare. And then from behind, a sudden movement. The final robber lunged, desperate, his weapon raised. The girl whispered sharply. Coda reacted instantaneously, intercepting, forcing the man to the ground with a precise, controlled tackle. The gun slid from the man's hands, clattering across the asphalt. Panic tore across the remaining intruders' faces. Rick swallowed hard. The diner fell silent. The chaos paused. Time itself seemed to stretch in the cold night air. The girl and Coda stood together, poised, commanding, unstoppable. Rick Dalton understood something crucial in that moment. The ones you throw away, the ones you underestimate, may be the very ones who save you when everything is about to fall apart. And outside, the night seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. The diner had transformed into a war zone. Glass shards littered the floor, silverware lay scattered like abandoned weapons, and the smell of burnt coffee and fear clung to every corner. Customers huddled under tables, eyes wide, hearts hammering. The air was thick with panic, with adrenaline, with the knowledge that any second could bring violence. Rick Dalton pressed himself against the counter, chest heaving, stomach knotted with guilt and fear. His hands shook as he reached for the phone to call the police, but the line went dead. Someone had already cut the wires, he realized with a sinking feeling. The intruders weren't amateurs. They were ruthless, organized, and dangerous. Outside, the girl crouched behind the dumpster, arms wrapped around her dog, Coda. The cold had turned her fingers red and stiff, but she barely noticed. Her focus was absolute, her mind racing faster than the winter wind. She didn't need the police. She didn't need help. All she needed was Coda, and together they had a plan. Inside, the robbers were unraveling. Their leader barked orders, voice tight with frustration. Check the back. Grab someone. Now. But the team hesitated, uncertainty breaking the unity that had seemed so unshakable just moments before. Panic was spreading like a virus, infecting even the toughest of them. Rick's heart sank as he realized something horrifying. If the girl and Coda failed, everyone inside, including him, would pay the price. He had thrown them out, judged them for appearances, and now they were the last line of defense. Then came the crash. One robber tried to escape through the side door, hopping to get a clear shot at the girl outside. But Coda was faster. The dog lunged with precision, forcing the man to stumble and drop his gun. The sound of the weapon hitting the pavement echoed through the alley. The man scrambled backward, tripping over a loose brick, cursing, terrified. The girl's voice cut through the cold night. Stop. Coda froze instantly, muscles coiled like springs, eyes sharp and focused. The intruder realized too late that he was no longer in control. The dog's low growl rolled through the air, warning and commanding, as if the very night itself had sided with the girl and her companion. Rick pressed his forehead against the counter, guilt twisting inside him. He should have let them in. He should have offered warmth, food, a place to sit. He had been blind, judgmental, arrogant, and now he was watching them save lives, lives he might have condemned with his own cold rules. Inside, the leader's frustration boiled over. Enough, move, he shouted, firing a shot into the ceiling to regain control. Sparks rained down from the fluorescent tiles, dust falling onto the terrified patrons. A woman screamed, clutching her child. Another man shook uncontrollably under the booth, murmuring prayers. The girl remained outside, her eyes scanning, calculating. She gave Coda a subtle signal, almost imperceptible, and the dog adjusted his stance. His body moved in perfect harmony with hers, a fluid, instinctual partnership forged through training, trust, and survival. Another robber attempted to rush outside, thinking he could confront the girl or retrieve the dog. Kota met him mid-step. In one swift, controlled motion, the dog knocked him off balance, tripping him into the snow. The man fell hard, sprawling in the ice, his gun sliding out of reach. Panic overtook him. He scrambled backward, eyes wide, realizing that he had underestimated his opposition in every way. Rick's jaw dropped. He could not believe what he was seeing. The so-called stray dog, the homeless girl he had thrown out, were not just holding their own, they were dominating the situation. Every move was precise, every command followed instantly, every action calculated to protect life rather than destroy it. The leader inside barked again, voice cracking with fury. "Get the hostages! Move!" But the fear in his tone betrayed him. His carefully orchestrated plan was crumbling before his eyes, undone by a girl and her dog standing in the freezing dark. Then, without warning, Kota darted to the other side of the entrance. Another intruder tried to escape into the street, but the dog was already there, muscles rippling, teeth bared, growling low and warning. The man froze in place, realizing too late that there was no escape. Rick swallowed hard. He realized that the girl and Kota were no ordinary duo. They were fearless, precise, trained, and unstoppable. The chaos inside the diner now mirrored the controlled storm outside, each side reflecting the other in tense symmetry. The leader fired another shot into the ceiling, sparks raining down again. One of the panicked robbers tripped over the counter, colliding with Rick. They both hit the floor, sliding across the linoleum, and Rick's face pressed against the cold, grimy tiles. A scream echoed through the diner. Rick lifted his head, heart racing, and saw one of the hostages trying to escape, panicked. The leader's gun swung toward her. Rick froze, helpless. That was when he noticed movement outside again. The girl had stepped forward. Her voice was calm but sharp. "Now." Kota reacted instantly, leaping toward the intruder at the window. Teeth snapped inches from the man's arms, forcing him to duck and scramble backward. The other robbers, inside and out, began shouting, chaos erupting like a wildfire. Rick stood slowly, realizing he had to act. He ran toward the window, shouting, "Please help us." His voice cracked, fear and desperation bleeding through. The girl hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward him. Trust was not given easily, but she finally nodded once and Kota adjusted his stance, ready for whatever came next. Inside, the remaining robbers panicked. One tried to bolt through the kitchen, another grabbed a hostage as a shield. Rick's stomach churned. He had judged them. He had turned them away. And now he was utterly dependent on them to save everyone inside. The girl gave another subtle command and Kota lunged, intercepting the robber trying to escape through the kitchen. The man went down, scrambling in the snow, fear etched into every line of his face. Another intruder, frozen in indecision, realized that he had no way out. The leader inside barked orders, but the panic had already taken hold. Confidence shattered. The team's unity disintegrated under the precision, speed, and control of a homeless girl and her dog. Rick's chest tightened. He felt shame, guilt, awe, and relief simultaneously. He had underestimated them completely. He had assumed weakness. He had assumed fear. And now he knew the truth. Sometimes the ones you push away, the ones you judge, are the ones who can save you when everything else fails. A sudden crash from the side alley broke the momentary lull. The last robber outside tried one final desperate move. Kota lunged without hesitation, knocking him off balance, sending the man sprawling into the snow. The gun slid across the asphalt, out of reach. Rick's hands trembled as he pressed his forehead against the counter. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The girl's voice, soft but commanding, guided Kota with almost imperceptible movements. Every step was calculated, precise, and life-saving. Then the faint sound of sirens reached the diner. Red and blue lights streaked across the walls and windows, growing closer. The remaining robbers froze, realizing that time had run out. Panic turned to desperation. Rick Dalton exhaled, chest tight with emotion. The girl and her dog had turned the tables entirely. They had saved lives, defied expectations, and confronted danger head-on, without hesitation, without fear, and without asking for anything in return. But as the sirens grew louder, Rick knew one thing with absolute certainty. The night was far from over. The girl whispered a final command to Coda, and the dog moved into position, guarding the exit. Inside, the robbers had no choice but to comply with the arrival of the police. Chaos had turned in the favor of the unexpected heroes. Rick Dalton realized, with a jolt of humility and awe, that he had witnessed something extraordinary. Courage, loyalty, and brilliance hidden behind the guise of a homeless girl and a scruffy dog. And outside, the cold wind carried the quiet, unwavering warning of a dog and the determined gaze of a girl who would not be underestimated again. The night was only halfway over. The diner was a storm of chaos and fear, yet outside the girl crouched low, her hand brushing Coda's coarse fur, her eyes scanning every shadow. Her body was tense but composed, a controlled nerve in the heart of danger. Every instinct honed over months of survival, every movement synchronized with Coda, told a story of precision and courage. Rick Dalton pressed himself against the counter, staring in disbelief. Plates lay shattered across the floor, chairs overturned, and the air was thick with smoke, dust, and adrenaline. But all he could focus on was the girl and her dog, poised like predators in the icy dark. Inside, the leader barked orders, desperation breaking through his authority. Grab them, now! But the confidence that had seemed unshakable just moments ago had crumbled. His men looked panicked, uncertain. One clutched his weapon with shaking hands, another hesitated by the doorway, glancing nervously toward the shattered glass. The girl's lips moved slightly, whispering commands only Coda could hear. His body shifted instantly, a shadow of pure focus, moving toward the nearest intruder. The dog's presence alone disrupted the robbers' plan, forcing them into reactive chaos. One robber rushed toward the front door, desperate to confront the girl or regain control of the situation. Coda intercepted in a single, fluid motion, shoulder pressing into the man's chest. The intruder stumbled, falling to the icy pavement. His gun skidded across the street. Panic flooded his eyes. Rick swallowed hard, heart pounding. He realized with a cold, sinking certainty that the dog was no ordinary animal. Every movement was calculated, deliberate, defensive. And the girl, her calm voice, her strategic whispers, guided him like a masterful commander. Inside, the leader's frustration escalated into anger. He fired a shot into the ceiling, sending sparks and dust raining down. The remaining robbers panicked further, their carefully rehearsed plan unraveling in a matter of moments. One desperate man grabbed a young woman as a shield, pressing the gun against her shoulder. "Do as I say," he shouted, fear breaking through his mask of control. Rick's stomach churned. He wanted to intervene, to grab the intruder, to save the woman, but he was paralyzed with fear. And outside, in the freezing dark, the girl and Coda were the only chance anyone had. The girl gave a subtle signal, almost imperceptible, and Coda shifted. In a blur, he darted inside through the broken front window, landing with calculated force. The intruder holding the woman stumbled, tripping backward, and Coda pinned him to the floor, not harming but immobilizing. The man's gun skidded across the tiles. A hush fell over the diner. The remaining robbers froze, uncertainty written on every face. They had underestimated the girl. They had underestimated the dog. And now, every plan they had relied upon had collapsed. Rick pressed against the wall, feeling both awe and guilt. He had judged them, thrown them out, dismissed their courage and loyalty. And now he realized with crushing clarity that they were heroes, silent, unexpected, unstoppable. The girl whispered again, calm and commanding. Coda moved like an extension of her will, intercepting another intruder attempting to flee toward the back exit. He tackled the man with precision, holding him down as the gun clattered to the floor. The leader's orders became frantic, meaningless in the face of such coordinated resistance. "Everyone stay down," the leader barked, but his voice carried none of the certainty it had minutes before. Panic and fear had replaced authority. The remaining robbers flinched at every sound, every movement, unsure where the next strike would come from. Rick's gaze shifted to the girl. Her eyes were sharp, unwavering. Her hands moved in subtle gestures, invisible to anyone inside the diner but immediately understood by Coda. The bond between them was astonishing, an unspoken language forged in necessity, trust, and instinct. The intruder pinned by Coda scrambled to free himself, but the dog's growl, low and threatening, held him in place. Outside, the girl whispered another word, and Coda adjusted, positioning himself to block any further escape attempts. The intruder froze, terrified, and the realization hit him. There was no way out. Inside, the leader tried to rally his men. "Move! Get control! Now!" His voice trembled. But the team was broken, each member paralyzed by fear, uncertainty, and the impossibility of confronting a homeless girl and her dog who moved with military precision. Rick Dalton could barely breathe. He had spent decades in this diner, enforcing rules, judging appearances, and controlling his world. And now he was a witness to a truth that humbled him completely. Courage does not come with status, wealth, or authority. It comes in unexpected forms, in scruffy coats and determined eyes, in loyalty unbound by circumstance. The girl whispered another subtle command. Coda darted forward, intercepting the last fleeing intruder, tackling him into a booth. Plates and silverware crashed to the floor, but the man was immobilized. His gun was out of reach, clattering uselessly across the tiles. Rick pressed a hand to his chest, his heart thudding like a drum. The diner was a mess, shattered glass, overturned chairs, spilled food, but the lives inside were intact. Every person inside was still alive, and it had all been because of her, because of them. The leader, realizing his plan had completely failed, froze in place. His hands shook, eyes darting to the exits, the hostages, the girl outside, and Coda. The dog's eyes met his, fierce and unwavering. The leader's facade of control crumbled into raw terror. Rick stepped toward the window. He wanted to apologize, to explain, but words failed him. Instead, he whispered a single plea, loud enough for them to hear, "Please help us." The girl's head tilted slightly, assessing him. Her trust was earned, not given. After a heartbeat, she nodded once. Coda adjusted, muscles tensing for any final threat. The leader's face paled as he realized that even outside intervention was impossible. They were completely at the mercy of a homeless girl and her dog. Then came the distant wail of sirens. Red and blue lights flashed across the diner walls. The robbers' panic escalated further. They were trapped, cornered, and completely outmatched. Coda remained vigilant, muscles taut, eyes scanning every shadow. The girl's whisper guided him, a subtle hand movement shifting his position. The intruders had no idea how to respond. They had underestimated the smallest, quietest forces in the room, and it had nearly cost them everything. Rick Dalton exhaled slowly, finally allowing himself to process what had just happened. The girl and Coda had saved everyone inside the diner without hesitation, without fear, and without asking for anything in return. The chaos, the fear, the terror, all had been met with calm, calculated courage. The police arrived, storming the diner with precision. Officers cuffed the remaining robbers, ensuring that no one else could escape. Inside, hostages sobbed with relief. The girl and Coda stepped aside, their task complete, but their eyes never left the scene. Rick Dalton finally met the girl's gaze. Shame, gratitude, and awe swirled together. I judged you," he whispered. I was wrong. You saved everyone. The girl's eyes softened, but she said nothing. Koda pressed his head against her knee, chest heaving, tail flicking slightly. Outside, the night air was still cold, but the storm of violence had passed for now. Rick realized with bitter clarity that he had witnessed something extraordinary. The girl, whom he had kicked out without a second thought, and her dog, whom he had assumed was a stray, had turned chaos into order. They had saved lives. They had exposed the weakness of those who relied on fear and intimidation, and they had reminded him that appearances could be deceiving. And in that moment, as the sirens blared and the robbers were led away, Rick Dalton understood something fundamental. The ones you dismiss, the ones you overlook, the ones you push away, sometimes they are the ones who will save you when the world is at its darkest. The girl whispered one last command to Koda, who moved beside her, ready to follow her anywhere. Together, they had faced the impossible and survived. Rick Dalton pressed a hand to his forehead, letting out a long, shuddering breath. His diner was a mess, his pride in tatters, but the lives inside had been preserved. And all it had taken was courage, loyalty, and the refusal to underestimate the one society had dismissed. And outside, the girl and her dog disappeared into the night, leaving behind a lesson Rick Dalton would never forget. True heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes, they come in scruffy coats and quiet determination. The night was far from over, but for now the worst had passed. And Rick Dalton knew that the girl and her dog had changed everything, forever. The sirens faded into the distance, leaving only the echoes of adrenaline and fear in the cold night air. The diner, once a haven of ordinary routine, was now a battlefield frozen in time, chairs overturned, shattered glass glinting like frozen tears, and the lingering smell of smoke, coffee, and panic. Inside, patrons whispered to one another, shaking and wide-eyed, grateful for life yet unable to comprehend the heroism that had saved them. Rick Dalton leaned against the counter, head bowed, heart pounding. He had survived countless challenges in his 30 years managing the diner, angry customers, petty theft, late-night fights. But tonight had been different. Tonight he had witnessed courage in its purest form, and he had failed to recognize it at first. He had judged a girl and her dog for appearances, and nearly paid a terrible price for his arrogance. Outside, the girl crouched beside Koda, breathing in the icy air. Her face was streaked with frost and a mixture of relief and tension. She ran her fingers through his fur, whispering soft, inaudible words of praise. Koda pressed his head against her shoulder, muscles still tense, ears twitching, eyes never leaving the diner. Despite the chaos, despite the violence, despite the freezing wind, he remained vigilant, the perfect guardian. Rick stepped outside, careful not to startle them. His hands shook as he spoke, voice low, laden with shame and awe. I owe you an apology. I judged you. The girl tilted her head slightly, studying him. Her eyes were sharp, wise beyond her years, yet filled with a quiet resilience. She did not speak, letting her silence carry the weight of unspoken truths. Koda growled softly, not in anger but as a protective warning. Rick swallowed hard, realizing that words alone could not convey the depth of his remorse. Please, he continued, voice trembling, you saved lives tonight. Everyone in there, it's because of you and him. He gestured toward Koda, who sat tall and alert, every muscle taut with energy and purpose. The girl finally spoke, her voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of experience far beyond her years. We didn't do it for thanks. We did it because we had to. Rick's eyes searched hers, trying to understand. But how did you know what to do? She looked down at Koda, her hand brushing his fur. He's not just a dog, he's trained. More than that, he understands. We've been through things together, things most people can't imagine. Her words were cryptic but carried an undeniable depth of emotion. Rick pressed a hand to his forehead. He had assumed she was helpless, that Koda was a stray scavenging scraps of food and warmth. He had been wrong. They had both endured hardship, yes, but they had also honed their instincts, cultivated trust and precision, and emerged stronger, more capable than anyone could have guessed. Can you tell me more?" Rick asked hesitantly, feeling a mix of curiosity, guilt, and awe. The girl's eyes softened, though her expression remained guarded. "Not everything, not yet, but you should know something." She knelt, bringing Coda closer. "He wasn't always with me. He belonged to someone I lost." Her voice broke slightly, though she quickly regained composure. "And when I found him, I knew we had a chance to protect each other, a chance to make a difference." Rick's chest tightened. He realized that what he had dismissed as a scruffy stray was actually a companion forged in loss and loyalty, trained through necessity, sharpened by survival, and dedicated to the girl with an unyielding devotion. Every movement, every calculation, every brave action during the robbery had been a product of that bond. A silence fell over the cold street, broken only by the occasional flicker of neon from the diner's sign. Rick looked at the girl, at Coda, and felt a profound humility settle over him. He had learned, painfully, that courage and loyalty could be found in the most unexpected forms. "You saved lives tonight," Rick said again, voice low. "And yet, you asked for nothing. You didn't want money or recognition, nothing." The girl shook her head, eyes steady. "We don't do it for that. We do it because someone has to. Someone has to stand when others can't. Someone has to act when the world would rather look away." Her voice carried the weight of lived experience, a wisdom far beyond her age. Rick's heart ached. He had seen countless acts of bravery in the news, in movies, in books. But none of them had compared to this, real courage, raw and immediate, born from necessity, love, and survival. He had judged them, and yet they had acted selflessly, without hesitation, without fear, without asking for reward. He swallowed hard. I want to help. If there's anything I can do, anything at all." His voice trailed off. The girl's eyes softened slightly. She studied him as if weighing the truth of his words. Finally, she said, "You can start by not judging, by remembering that appearances can be deceiving, that courage isn't always loud or easy to see." Rick nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink deep into his soul. He had learned a lesson he would never forget, that heroism can hide in the shadows, behind matted fur, behind worn coats, behind quiet determination. And sometimes, those shadows are the only ones standing between life and death. Coda shifted, pressing his head against the girl's shoulder. He had done his duty, yet remained alert, ever watchful. Rick marveled at the dog's presence, strength and loyalty intertwined with intelligence and courage. This was no ordinary animal. This was a guardian, a partner, a hero. The girl rose to her feet, eyes scanning the quiet street. "We should go," she said softly. "There's still work to do, things we can't explain yet." Rick nodded, though a part of him wanted to ask more, to understand every detail of the bond between the girl and Coda, to know their story in full. But he realized that some things were not for him to grasp, not yet. Some courage is meant to inspire, not to be dissected. As they disappeared into the darkness, Rick Dalton felt a mix of awe, humility, and hope. He had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would remain with him forever. A homeless girl and her scruffy dog had faced down armed robbers, protected lives, and demonstrated a courage and intelligence that defied every assumption he had ever made. Rick pressed a hand to his forehead, letting out a long, shuddering breath. His diner was a mess, his pride in tatters, but the lives inside had been preserved. And he had learned a lesson he would carry forever. Never underestimate the quiet, the overlooked, the one society labels powerless. The night had been a crucible, and from it emerged clarity. Loyalty, courage, and determination do not require status, wealth, or recognition. They require heart. They require trust. They require love. And outside, beneath the flickering neon and cold winter sky, a girl and her dog moved silently through the shadows, bound together by loss, loyalty, and the unbreakable promise to protect what mattered. Rick Dalton watched them go, a mixture of awe and gratitude swelling in his chest. He would never see a stray dog or a homeless child the same way again. He would never judge so quickly, never assume weakness where strength might be hidden. For in the cold night, in the midst of chaos and fear, he had seen the truth. True heroes are forged in shadows, guided by loyalty and defined by courage. And sometimes they are the ones you least expect to save the day. The street was quiet once more, but the memory lingered, an indelible mark on Rick Dalton, a reminder that the world is full of surprises, and that sometimes the smallest, quietest figures can hold the greatest power. And somewhere in the distance, the girl whispered to Coda, "Let's keep moving. There's still work to do." Coda's tail flicked once, eyes bright and alert, ready for whatever came next. The night was far from over. The city streets were slick with melting snow, reflecting the glow of streetlights and the red and blue streaks of police sirens that had long since faded. The girl and Coda moved silently, a perfect unit of movement honed through months of survival. Her coat was thin, her breath visible in sharp clouds against the freezing night, but her focus never wavered. Coda trotted beside her, muscles rippling under his thick fur, ears twitching at every sound, every whisper of movement in the alleyways. They paused beneath the shadow of a fire escape. The girl pressed her back against the cold brick wall, eyes scanning the street behind them. The night had been chaotic, violent, and exhausting, but they were not done. There were loose ends to tie, questions to answer, and safety to ensure. Coda leaned against her, steadying her, a silent reassurance that whatever came next, they would face it together. Rick Dalton, meanwhile, had been shaken to his core. Inside his diner, he moved through the wreckage, a mixture of guilt and admiration pressing heavy on his chest. Chairs remained overturned, glass littered the floor, but he could not focus on the mess. His mind replayed every moment, the girl's composure, Coda's precision, the courage that defied expectation. He had judged them too quickly. He had assumed weakness where there was strength, despair where there was resolve. And now he could not forget what he had seen. He stepped outside again, following the street where the girl and dog had disappeared. He kept his distance, unsure how to approach, yet driven by a need to understand. Every step crunching on the frost-covered pavement reminded him of his failure to see what was extraordinary before him. Meanwhile, the girl led Coda toward a narrow alley, far from the chaos of the diner. Her mind raced. She had anticipated every possible movement of the robbers, yet the fear and desperation she had seen in their eyes lingered with her. She knew that the danger was not entirely gone. Some might return, emboldened by their earlier failure, seeking vengeance or retribution. "Coda," she whispered, her hand brushing the dog's head, "we need to be ready." The dog's ears twitched. He understood. Every fiber of his being was attuned to her, a silent promise of protection and loyalty. They had survived so far because of this unbreakable bond, forged through loss, struggle, and necessity. And though the night had been won, the lessons and scars it left behind were far from over. Rick Dalton finally caught up, his breath clouding in the frigid air. I need to know," he said, voice trembling. "How did you do it? How did you train him? How do you stay so calm?" The girl's eyes narrowed slightly. "Training isn't just commands, it's trust, it's understanding. Coda and I, we understand each other. We've been through things that most people can't imagine. We've faced loss, danger, and fear together. That's why we survived tonight." Rick's chest tightened. He had always prided himself on understanding people, on recognizing character and integrity. Yet here in front of him was a child and a dog who defied every assumption he had ever made. Humility washed over him, bitter and sharp. He had assumed poverty meant weakness. He had assumed homelessness meant helplessness. He had been wrong. The girl shifted, glancing down the alley, her eyes softened slightly. "He wasn't always mine," she said quietly. "He belonged to someone I loved, someone I lost." Her voice faltered, but she regained her composure. "When I found him, I knew I could protect him and he could protect me. We've been together ever since. That's why he's more than just a dog." Rick swallowed hard. He had expected to meet a frightened, vulnerable child. Instead, he found a survivor, a strategist, a force to be reckoned with. And Coda, the so-called stray, was a warrior forged through love and loyalty, capable of incredible courage and precision. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the alley, a faint scuffing of shoes, a shadow moving against the brick walls. The girl's posture stiffened. Coda growled low in his throat, muscles coiling like springs. They had not been alone. Someone had followed them, watching, waiting. Rick's eyes widened. Are they coming back?" he whispered. The girl's eyes narrowed. "Possibly," she said softly, "but we're ready." Her voice carried no fear, only focus. Coda's growl deepened. He stepped closer to her, a living shield, ready to act at the first sign of danger. From the shadows emerged a figure, one of the surviving robbers from the diner, still trembling, eyes wild with panic. You don't understand," the man stammered, hands raised. I didn't mean." The girl raised a hand, signaling Coda to stand down, though the dog remained alert, watching every twitch and movement. "I understand enough," she said. "You made a choice. You chose fear. You chose violence. And now you face the consequences." Rick Dalton stepped closer, realizing that justice, in its rawest form, had been enacted tonight. Not by law, not by police, but by courage, loyalty, and intellect disguised as a child and her dog. The robber collapsed to his knees, panic and relief mixing in his eyes. He had been saved from Coda's attack by a fraction of a second, yet he understood that his life now rested entirely in their hands. The girl spoke again, her voice calm but unyielding. "Go, leave, and never come back, or next time." Her hand hovered slightly, Coda leaning forward in perfect synchronization, teeth bared, muscles tensed. "There will be no warning." The man nodded frantically, scrambling backward into the night, disappearing into the shadows that had once concealed him. Rick exhaled, chest tight, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had witnessed. The girl and Coda were more than survivalists. They were protectors, strategists, guardians forged in adversity. And they had spared lives tonight not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because it was necessary. The girl knelt beside Coda, brushing the snow from his fur. "Good work," she whispered. The dog pressed his head against her shoulder, tail flicking once. Together they were more than human and animal. They were a unit, inseparable, unstoppable, and unparalleled. Rick Dalton felt a profound shift within himself. He had been arrogant, judgmental, and blind to the strength that lived in unexpected forms. Tonight had shattered his assumptions and taught him a lesson he would carry forever. Heroism is not always obvious. Strength does not always wear a uniform. Courage often comes in quiet, scruffy, and unlikely forms. The girl finally looked up at him. "Remember what you saw," she said softly. "And remember this, never underestimate the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones you think are powerless. They may be the only ones who can save you when it matters most." Rick nodded, swallowing hard. He could barely speak. Words seemed insufficient for the awe and gratitude that churned within him. All he could do was watch, humbled, as the girl and her dog disappeared once more into the night, leaving behind lessons of courage, loyalty, and unwavering resilience. The streets were silent again, but the memory of the night, the fear, the chaos, the heroism would linger forever. Rick Dalton knew he would never look at a child or a dog or at courage itself the same way again. Somewhere in the shadows, the girl whispered again to Coda, "Let's move, there's more to do." And the dog, alert, loyal, unwavering, followed without hesitation. The night was far from over, and the story of the girl and her dog was only just beginning. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the city in muted shades of pink and gray. The streets, still glistening from melting snow, were eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous night. The diner, battered and broken, stood as a silent witness to the drama that had unfolded inside its walls. Overturned chairs, shattered glass, and scattered debris were the scars of a battle that had been won, not by brute force, but by courage, intelligence, and loyalty. Rick Dalton stepped outside, the chill in the morning air failing to penetrate the heat of gratitude and awe that burned in his chest. He had spent decades managing this diner, enforcing rules, judging character, and maintaining order. But last night had undone all of that. He had misjudged someone, dismissed a life and a companion as stray and helpless, and come dangerously close to allowing tragedy to unfold. And yet here they were, alive, safe, saved by the unlikeliest of heroes, a little girl and her German shepherd. He spotted her first, perched atop the fire escape, Coda at her side, ears alert, muscles coiled and ready. The girl's coat was frosted with ice and snow, but her eyes were fierce, determined, unyielding. She was scanning the streets, always aware, always vigilant. Coda pressed close to her, a living extension of her awareness, his loyalty absolute. Rick's voice broke the silence. "Hey, wait," he called, stepping closer. She looked down, curiosity and caution warring in her gaze. I want to thank you properly. I owe you more than I can ever repay." The girl didn't move. Her eyes softened only slightly. "You judged me," she said softly. "You thought we were weak, helpless, nothing." Rick's throat tightened. "I know, and I was wrong. I see that now. I see everything." She studied him silently, then gave a small nod. "Words are not enough. Actions matter, remember that." Rick swallowed, eyes misting. He had spent his life relying on appearances, on status, on protocol. But last night had taught him a far more important lesson. Courage, loyalty, and integrity often come in the quietest forms, hidden beneath layers the world refuses to see. The sound of police vehicles returning filled the morning air. Officers moved with methodical precision, rounding up the last of the robbers, ensuring no loose ends remained. Rick watched as the criminals, terrified and defeated, were taken away in handcuffs. Their arrogance, their confidence, their assumptions about power and control, shattered by a girl and her dog. The girl and Coda descended the fire escape, landing gracefully on the sidewalk. Rick held his breath, unsure if he dared to approach further, but she walked toward him, eyes locked on his, Coda moving seamlessly at her side. "You did your part," she said quietly. "But remember, strength is not in fear. Strength is in protection, loyalty, and action when it counts." Rick nodded solemnly, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. "I will remember, I promise." Coda tilted his head, ears flicking, muscles still coiled, a silent reminder that vigilance never rested. The bond between the girl and her dog was undeniable, a partnership forged in adversity, sharpened by trust and unbreakable in its loyalty. "Come on, Coda," the girl whispered. "We need to move." She stepped forward, disappearing into the early morning fog, Coda following instantly, a guardian and companion, inseparable and unstoppable. Rick Dalton watched them go, understanding fully for the first time that he had witnessed something extraordinary. The girl and her dog had not just survived, they had conquered fear, protected lives, and demonstrated a form of courage that defied description. They were heroes in the truest sense of the word, unsung and unrecognized, yet undeniable in their impact. As he turned to survey the diner, a soft sigh escaped him. The wreckage, the shattered glass, the overturned chairs, they were reminders of chaos and danger, but also of resilience and survival. And he knew, deep in his bones, that nothing would ever be the same again. Later that morning, after the police had departed, Rick began the painstaking process of cleaning the diner. Each sweep of a broom, each shattered piece of glass picked up, felt like an act of atonement, a way to reconcile with his own mistakes. Every motion reminded him of the lesson he had learned. Never judge by appearances, never underestimate courage, and never dismiss loyalty and heart. Word of the incident began to spread through the city, whispered in awe by those who had witnessed it firsthand, and shared in stunned disbelief by those who had heard about the girl and her dog. They became a symbol, A reminder that heroism does not always come in uniforms, badges, or titles. Sometimes, it comes from the most unlikely sources. Rick Dalton, for his part, knew he could never forget. He had seen the bond between the girl and Coda, the precision and courage that could topple even the most dangerous threats, and the moral clarity that had guided every action. And he had been humbled by it. Weeks later, the girl returned to the diner, not to seek recognition, not to ask for reward, but simply to check in. Coda trotted beside her, ears flicking, eyes alert, tail sweeping low but confident. Rick greeted her, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I want to make sure you're okay," he said, voice steady. "And I want to offer you and him anything you need, a meal, a warm place, anything." The girl smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of trust. "Thank you," she said, "but we're okay. We always find a way." Rick nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. He had been given a rare gift, the chance to witness true courage, loyalty, and heroism firsthand, and he knew he would never take appearances for granted again. Coda pressed against her side, sensing her calm, alerting only when necessary, a loyal guardian who had proven his worth in the crucible of life and chaos. Together, they walked away from the diner, into the soft morning light, leaving behind the wreckage of fear and violence, but carrying forward a bond stronger than anything Rick could have imagined. And as they disappeared into the streets, Rick Dalton understood fully. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones society overlooks, the ones dismissed as helpless, weak, or stray. And sometimes the smallest, quietest, most unlikely figures can change everything. The diner had survived, the lives inside were safe, and justice had been served, not by luck, not by law, but by courage, loyalty, and unwavering determination. Rick Dalton would never forget that night, the girl and Coda, the true heroes who had reminded him, in the most dramatic and unforgettable way, that appearances can deceive, but courage never lies. He watched as the city slowly came to life, the first buses rumbling, shopkeepers opening doors, the sun creeping higher. And somewhere in the distance, a little girl and her German shepherd moved silently, ready for whatever challenges awaited, bound by trust, loyalty, and an unbreakable bond. The night was over, but the legend of their courage would echo forever. Rick Dalton pressed a hand to his chest, letting out a long, shuddering breath. He had survived the night, yes, but more importantly, he had been changed by it. He had learned a lesson he would carry forever. The ones you dismiss, the ones you underestimate, the ones society labels powerless, they may be the ones who save the day when it matters most. And somewhere in the distance, beneath the rising sun, the girl whispered softly to Coda, "Let's keep moving. There's still work to do." Coda's ears flicked, tail swept low, eyes bright and alert. Together they vanished into the dawn, ready for whatever came next. The city was safe for now. But the story of the girl and her dog, their courage, their loyalty, and their unbreakable bond would never be forgotten.